Leaving the high, thin air of the Andes, you now find yourself transported across the vast, shimmering expanse of the Pacific Ocean to a collection of islands bathed in warm sunlight and surrounded by the endless blue. Imagine the gentle lapping of waves against a sandy shore, the rustle of palm fronds in a soft breeze, and the scent of salt and tropical flowers heavy in the air. This is Oceania, a realm of diverse cultures, intricate navigation, and belief systems deeply connected to the sea, the land, and the power of ancestors. Here, anthropophagy often took on a different hue, deeply entwined with concepts of status, spiritual energy, and the very essence of personhood. Hey guys! Tonight we're stepping into the shadows of human history, a place where the lines between survival, ritual, and taboo blur in ways that might just make your stomach do a slow, uncomfortable flip. Imagine yourself not tucked into your warm bed, but huddled by a sputtering fire, the wind whistling through gaps in your rough shelter. Outside, the primeval world stirs, perhaps a distant howl, or the rustle of unseen creatures. You're hungry, truly hungry, in a way that modern supermarkets and drive-thrus simply can't fathom. Every morsel matters, every calorie is a lifeline, and in that desperate, ancient world, survival sometimes demanded unthinkable choices. This isn't just about what they ate, but why they might have eaten it, and what that tells us about the very core of being human. If you were there, honestly, you probably wouldn't survive the first week. The thought alone sends shivers, doesn't it? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening, drop a comment below with your city and local time. It's always wild to see where our quiet community gathers. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The common historical fact that might first come to mind when you think of Pacific Island practices is the notorious reputation of some groups, particularly in Fiji, New Zealand Maori, and parts of Papua New Guinea, for practicing cannibalism, often in the context of warfare. This wasn't always about nutrition, it was fundamentally about power. You might hear the distant echoes of war chants, the rhythmic thud of feet on hard-packed earth, and feel the tension in the air as rival groups confronted each other. It's like a particularly intense rugby match, but with much, much higher stakes for the losing side. You find yourself standing on the precipice of a primal forest, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. Your ancestors, many millennia ago, faced a world far more brutal and unpredictable than anything you or I could truly comprehend. Food wasn't a grocery list, it was a constant, grinding quest. Every hunt was a gamble, every foraging expedition fraught with danger. In such circumstances, the concept of waste was an alien luxury. When a great beast fell, no part was discarded. Bone marrow, organs, even the brain, all held precious nutrients. This practical approach to sustenance forms the bedrock of understanding how certain dietary practices, which seem horrific to your modern sensibilities, might have first taken root. In these societies, the consumption of a defeated enemy was not simply an act of savagery, but a highly ritualized and deeply symbolic act. By eating the flesh, and sometimes the organs, of a vanquished foe, a warrior was believed to absorb their mana, their spiritual power, strength, and prestige. It was the ultimate act of domination, a way to utterly defeat an enemy not just physically, but spiritually. You watch, perhaps with a knot in your stomach, as victorious warriors perform the necessary rites, a grim celebration of their triumph and a direct transference of power. Consider the sheer energy expenditure of ancient life. You're constantly moving, tracking game, gathering plants, defending your territory, building shelter. Your body is a finely tuned machine, demanding constant fuel. When resources are scarce, when the winter winds howl and game disappears, every possible caloric source becomes vital. It's in these lean times that the most extreme measures might have been considered. It's not a choice of gourmet or bland, it's a choice of life or death. Imagine the gnawing emptiness in your gut, the weakening of your limbs, the fog descending over your mind. The instinct to survive, the most fundamental drive, pushes against the very boundaries of what you might deem acceptable. The motivations were complex and multifaceted. It was a terrifying deterrent for enemies, a way to honor the brave among your own who captured such foes, and a means to assimilate the qualities of the defeated. Imagine the psychological blow to a rival tribe, knowing that not only would their warriors be killed, but their very essence might be consumed by their conquerors. It's a profound act of disrespect and a chilling display of superiority, far more personal than merely taking a scalp. It's like your opponent not only wins the game, but then wears your uniform to the victory parade. One common historical fact, often discussed in hushed tones, is that instances of cannibalism have indeed been recorded across various human cultures throughout history, from isolated tribal groups to more complex societies. Though the motivations were incredibly diverse, it wasn't always about hunger. In fact, more often than not, it was steeped in complex ritual, spiritual beliefs, or even acts of extreme vengeance or dominance. You might be picturing some cartoon villain gnawing on a bone, but the reality was far more nuanced and, in its own way, much more unsettling in its rationality. But here's an obscure detail that adds a fascinating layer to these practices among some groups, particularly the Maori of New Zealand. There was a specific emphasis on the consumption of the enemy's brain and eyes, as these were believed to be the primary receptacles of mana. While other parts of the body might be eaten, these specific organs held a special, concentrated power. The act of eating them was not about hunger, but about a deliberate spiritual transaction. It was less about a full meal and more about a very potent and incredibly unsettling energy drink. Let's unpack the idea of taboo for a moment. Every society, every group, defines what is permissible and what is absolutely not. These taboos often surround the most fundamental aspects of human existence: birth, death, and consumption. Eating another human being, in most modern cultures, stands as the ultimate culinary taboo. It triggers a profound sense of revulsion. But for ancient peoples, the moral framework was vastly different. Their worldviews, their relationship with death, and their understanding of the spiritual realm profoundly shaped their practices. What you consider an unthinkable violation, they might have seen as a necessary act of respect, a spiritual transfer, or even a grim necessity. It's like trying to explain quantum physics to a squirrel. Their fundamental operating system is just wired differently. This selective consumption speaks volumes about their understanding of the human body and spirit. It wasn't just about the physical defeat, but about harnessing the intangible, spiritual qualities of the defeated. It implies a sophisticated understanding of their cosmology and the pathways through which power could be transferred. An obscure detail, often overlooked when discussing ancient dietary habits, is the phenomenon of osteophagia, or the consumption of bones, specifically for their mineral content. While not strictly cannibalism, early humans and hominids certainly gnawed on the bones of animals, and even other hominids, long after the meat was gone, not just for marrow, but to extract calcium, phosphorus, and other vital minerals. This isn't about hunger for flesh, but for fundamental building blocks that might be missing from other parts of their diet. It paints a picture of extreme resourcefulness, where even the seemingly inedible parts of a carcass were considered valuable. Imagine chewing on a dry bone for hours just to get a minuscule amount of calcium. Not exactly a five-star dining experience, is it? The academic debate surrounding Pacific Island cannibalism often centers on the extent to which it was nutritional versus purely ritualistic, and the reliability of early European accounts, which sometimes sensationalized or exaggerated the practice. While it's clear that ritual was paramount, periods of scarcity or famine could have occasionally blurred the lines, turning a symbolic act into one with practical benefits. However, most scholars agree that the primary driver was the absorption of mana and the assertion of dominance, rather than a desperate need for calories. It's like arguing whether a championship trophy is mostly for bragging rights, or if it also tastes good if you lick it. The concept of dietary shifts in prehistory is a field of intense study. As humans evolved, our diet changed dramatically. From opportunistic scavenging to coordinated hunting, each shift brought new challenges and opportunities. The development of stone tools, the mastery of fire, and eventually, agriculture, profoundly altered how and what we ate. But before these advancements, when protein was a constant struggle to obtain, every advantage counted. And sometimes that advantage came from unexpected sources. You feel the humid air on your skin and the vibrant life of the islands around you. These societies were highly stratified, with complex social hierarchies and codes of conduct. Warfare was often endemic, driven by competition over resources, land, and prestige. In such a volatile environment, any act that could enhance a warrior's power or demoralize an enemy was a valuable tool. The practice of anthropophagy, therefore, served multiple purposes, solidifying social bonds within the victorious group and striking fear into the hearts of their adversaries. For instance, consider the caloric density of human organs. The brain, the liver, the heart. These are packed with fat and essential nutrients. In a world where starvation was a very real and present danger, passing up such a rich source of energy would have been nonsensical purely from a survival standpoint. This isn't to say it was commonplace or preferred, but rather that the sheer biological imperative to live could override deeply ingrained social instincts, especially when no other options were available. Consider the preparation. The bodies of enemies were often cooked in earth ovens like the mori hangi, which could take many hours. This wasn't a quick, desperate meal. It was a deliberate, communal event, often involving specific rituals and prayers. The slow cooking transformed the body, perhaps symbolically preparing it for the spiritual transfer. You might smell the smoky earth, the steam rising, and the unsettling aroma of the roasting meat. Historians still debate whether early instances of human bone modification, such as cut marks or specific breakage patterns, definitively point to nutritional cannibalism, ritualistic practice, or even funerary rites. The archaeological record is often ambiguous, leaving much open to interpretation. It's like trying to reconstruct a complex multi-act play from a few discarded props and some faint whispers. Was it a sacred offering, a desperate meal, or simply a way to prepare the deceased for burial? The lines are incredibly fine, and the evidence rarely screams out a definitive answer. Recall the concept of taboo from Chapter 1. Here, you see a striking example of how a behavior considered utterly reprehensible in many cultures is, in others, imbued with profound spiritual and social significance. It forces you to confront the limits of your own cultural lens and the vast diversity of human moral frameworks. What is an abomination to one is a sacred right to another. It's a powerful challenge to your preconceived notions of right and wrong. You might wonder, how did these practices even begin to take hold? Did someone just wake up one morning and decide, hey, let's try something different for breakfast? Unlikely. More probably, it was a gradual evolution, perhaps starting with opportunistic scavenging of already deceased individuals during times of extreme famine. Or perhaps it was a grim extension of warfare, where consuming the defeated enemy was a supreme act of humiliation or an attempt to absorb their strength. The pathways into these behaviors are as varied as the cultures that practice them. The impact of European contact on these practices was profound. Missionaries and colonial powers, horrified by anthropophagy, actively suppressed it, often through violent means. This suppression was part of a broader effort to civilize indigenous populations, dismantle their traditional social structures, and impose Western values and Christianity. The decline of these practices, therefore, is directly tied to the forces of colonialism and globalization. Think about the psychological impact. What does it do to the human mind to cross such a boundary? Does it harden you, or does it leave an indelible scar? For ancient peoples, their relationship with death was far more intimate and integrated into daily life. Death was not something sanitized and hidden away. It was an ever-present force. Bodies were not just vessels for the living. They were part of the natural cycle, returning to the earth, or, in some cases, becoming part of the community in a different way. It's a very different cultural lens through which to view these acts. You might cringe, but they might have seen it as simply another aspect of existence. Archaeological evidence supporting these accounts includes cut marks on human bones, consistent with butchery, often found in association with hearths or refuse pits. At sites like the fortified PA sites in New Zealand, evidence suggests the systematic processing of human remains, aligning with historical accounts. Furthermore, as early ethnographic records, though sometimes biased, provide detailed descriptions of the rituals and motivations behind these acts. The notion of the other is crucial here. In many historical contexts where cannibalism occurred, it was almost always directed at outsiders' enemies, captives, or strangers. The act served to dehumanize them further, reinforcing group identity and solidarity. It was a potent symbol of power and conquest. Imagine the fear instilled in rival tribes knowing that not only could you be defeated, but you could also be consumed. That's a psychological weapon far more terrifying than any spear. The practice wasn't always uniform across the vast Pacific. While it was prevalent in some areas, it was rare or non-existent in others. This regional variation highlights the complex interplay of cultural beliefs, environmental factors, and historical development. It's not a single monolithic practice, but a tapestry of diverse customs. For example, some islands focused more on preserving enemy skulls as trophies, while others prioritized consumption. But then there's the other side of the coin, endo-cannibalism, the consumption of one's own kin or community members. This practice, while equally shocking to modern sensibilities, often arose from deeply spiritual motivations. It was a way to honor the deceased, to keep their spirit or essence within the living community, to prevent their energy from dissipating into the ether. It was an act of profound love and connection, not hunger or hatred. It's a stark reminder that what seems monstrous to one culture can be deeply sacred to another. It really makes you rethink what family dinner means, doesn't it? You might think about the psychological aspect for the warrior who performed the act. Was there a moment of hesitation? Or was the belief in mana so strong that the act became purely ceremonial? The training, the social conditioning, and the immediate context of triumph would have likely overridden any modern sense of disgust. For them, it was an affirmation of their identity, their power, and their connection to the spiritual realm. One fascinating aspect is how these practices were rationalized within the worldview of the time. They weren't just random acts of barbarity. They were embedded in complex belief systems, origin myths, and cosmologies. The consumption of an enemy's heart might be believed to impart their courage. Eating the brain might transfer their wisdom. The ritual was not merely the physical act of eating, but the spiritual transaction believed to occur. It was, in their minds, a logical extension of their understanding of the universe. As you feel the warm Pacific breeze on your face, and the sun sets in a blaze of color over the ocean, the vivid images of these ceremonial feasts fade into the tranquil evening. You're left with a deeper understanding of how deeply spiritual beliefs can shape even the most unsettling human practices. The pursuit of power, the reverence for spiritual essence, and the assertion of dominance drove these acts, leaving a complex legacy that continues to challenge and fascinate, reminding you that the lines between the sacred and the profane are often drawn in unexpected ways. The archaeological evidence for ancient cannibalism often comes from fragmented bones, showing telltale signs of processing cut marks from stone tools, specific fracture patterns indicative of marrow extraction, or even charring consistent with cooking. Sometimes human bones are found mixed with animal bones, all bearing similar butchery marks. These clues, painstakingly pieced together by archaeologists, allow us to peer into these otherwise lost chapters of human behavior. It's like finding a single dusty receipt and trying to guess what kind of restaurant it was from. You leave behind the warm, salty air of the Pacific, the vibrant ceremonies of mana absorption, and suddenly, the temperature drops, the light dims, and you feel a distinct chill seep into your bones. The lush tropical foliage gives way to barren, ice-scoured landscapes, and the open sky narrows into the low, echoing confines of a cave. You're now deep in prehistoric Europe, tens of thousands of years ago, a time when the continent was a vast, unforgiving wilderness, shaped by glaciers and teeming with megafauna. Here, the struggle for survival was constant, and the choices made often pushed the boundaries of what you might consider human. The transition from purely opportunistic scavenging or survival cannibalism to ritualistic forms would have been profound. It signifies a cognitive leap, where a basic biological act is imbued with deeper meaning, becoming a powerful symbol. This is where the human mind truly differentiates itself. Our capacity to create meaning, to weave narratives around our existence, even around something as primal as what we eat. The common historical fact that emerges from these ancient European depths is the compelling archaeological evidence indicating that some early human populations, and even Neanderthals, engaged in anthropophagy during the Ice Age. This wasn't necessarily for ritual or power. as in Mesoamerica or the Pacific, but often linked to extreme environmental pressures and the brutal realities of survival. You might imagine the howling winds outside, the gnawing hunger within, and the desperate need to find any source of sustenance. It's less about a grand ceremony and more about a primal, chilling practicality. As you drift deeper into this historical reverie, consider the sheer resilience of early humans. They adapted to environments that would crush you in an instant, developed technologies with only the simplest materials, and found ways to survive against overwhelming odds. Their dietary practices, however uncomfortable they may seem, were a testament to that unyielding will to live, coupled with belief systems that shaped their reality in ways we can now only dimly perceive. It's a chilling thought, but also a testament to the sheer ingenuity and adaptability of our distant ancestors. They faced a world that demanded everything, and they gave everything. Sometimes quite literally. You find yourself peering into the dim recesses of a site like Gough's Cave in Somerset, England, or the renowned cave complex of Atapuerca in Spain. What do you see? Not intact skeletons, but scattered human bones, deliberately broken. They bear distinct cut marks, just like those found on animal bones that were butchered for meat. You see evidence of percussion fractures, consistent with breaking bones to extract marrow, a highly nutritious, energy-rich substance. It's a stark, undeniable record, laid out on the dusty cave floor, speaking volumes about the desperate measures taken to endure. Imagine, for a moment, the silence of the cave, broken only by the sound of bone cracking and the cold reality of what that implies. The whispers of these ancient taboos continue to echo through time, challenging your modern understanding of morality, necessity, and the very nature of humanity. They remind you that the world your ancestors inhabited was a canvas of survival, ritual, and belief, painted in shades both familiar and profoundly alien. You are just a tiny part of a much larger story, stretching back through countless generations, each grappling with the same fundamental question: how do we survive? And what does it mean to be human? This practice, often termed survival cannibalism, suggests that in times of extreme scarcity, human flesh became a viable, albeit last resort, food source. These were not easy times. The Ice Age brought harsh winters, limited resources, and intense competition. You can almost feel the biting cold that would drive desperate decisions, the hunger pains that would silence all other instincts. It paints a picture far removed from your comfortable modern life, where a bad day means the coffee shop ran out of your favorite latte. As the last embers of that thought-provoking journey from Chapter 1 cool, you find yourself transported even further back in time, to the raw, untamed dawn of human prehistory. We're not just talking about your great-great-great-grandparents anymore. We're peering into the lives of beings who were, in many ways, fundamentally different from you, yet also remarkably similar in their struggle for existence. Imagine the world as a vast, unpredictable wilderness, where survival was a daily, brutal negotiation. The air smells damp and earthy, perhaps with a hint of something animalistic, something wild. You hear the rustle of unseen creatures, the distant roar of an apex predator, and the soft crackle of a newly discovered, yet still terrifying, friend fire. But here's an obscure detail that really drives home the unsettling nature of these finds in some sites. Particularly Gough's Cave. Researchers have identified human skulls that were meticulously cleaned of flesh, modified by breaking the brow ridge, and carefully shaped to be used as drinking vessels or skull cups. These weren't simply leftover bones, they were deliberately processed and repurposed, suggesting something beyond mere consumption for survival. It elevates the act to a level of symbolic significance, perhaps as a macabre trophy or part of a post-mortem ritual. It's like finding a vintage teacup, but realizing it's made from something much, much more personal. Talk about a conversation starter at your next dinner party, right? In this deep past, archaeological sites become our faint echoes, our only real whispers from vanished worlds. You're now a careful observer, sifting through layers of earth, examining every stone flake, every fragmented bone, and sometimes, among the scattered remains of ancient meals, the gnawed bones of deer, mammoths, or saber-toothed cats, you encounter something that sends a jolt through your very core human bones, bearing similar marks. This isn't just about finding a skeleton. It's about finding evidence of deliberate processing, often indistinguishable from how large game animals were butchered. The presence of these skull cups, along with the precise and systematic processing of human remains, including defleshing, disarticulation, and marrow extraction, indicates a comprehensive exploitation of the body. It's not just eat what you can, it's use every last bit. This meticulousness suggests a level of planning and cultural practice, rather than purely frantic desperation. It challenges the simple survival explanation, hinting at complex motivations that are still being unraveled. This common historical fact, which has quietly revolutionized our understanding of early human behavior, is the discovery of these very ancient sites, dating back hundreds of thousands of years, where hominin remains show signs of intentional cutting, fracturing, and even charring. It's evidence that early hominins, long before modern humans even emerged, engaged in activities that, to your modern eyes, look very much like the preparation of bodies for consumption. Think about that for a moment. The practice, in some form, might be older than your species itself. It suggests a deep, unsettling root in the evolutionary tree of human behavior. It's enough to make you reconsider that second cup of coffee, isn't it? The academic debate surrounding these European finds is intense and ongoing. Scholars continue to fiercely debate whether these instances of anthropophagy were driven solely by nutritional stress and survival, or if ritualistic, symbolic, or even territorial violence played a more significant role. Was it a last resort born of starvation, or a grim assertion of dominance over rival groups? The evidence is often ambiguous, leading to vigorous discussions among paleontologists and archaeologists. It's like a never-ending detective story, where the clues are thousands of years old and can't exactly talk. One of the most famous and unsettling examples comes from the Grandolina site in Atapuerca, Spain. Here, archaeologists unearthed the remains of Homo antecessor, an extinct hominin species, dating back almost 1 million years. What they found was a collection of bones belonging to at least 11 individuals, many of them juveniles, intermingled with animal bones, and crucial to our story tonight. Many of these human bones displayed cut marks, percussion marks, and even signs of marrow extraction, all identical to those found on the bones of hunted animals. It's not just 1 or 2 isolated bones, it's a pattern, a consistent method of processing. You see the same signs of skinning, dismembering, and defleshing on a Homo antecessor femur as you would on a deer leg. You might consider the psychological toll on these prehistoric people. Even if driven by dire necessity, the act of consuming one's own kind must have left an indelible mark. Was there a specific cultural framework that allowed this, perhaps a desensitization to death in a world where it was omnipresent, or was it a deeply traumatic experience, undertaken only when all other options vanished? The answers are lost to the mists of time, but the questions linger, chillingly. Now, why? The big question that immediately leaps to your mind is, why was it pure survival? Perhaps these early hominins lived in a challenging environment, but the sheer volume of bones and the consistent nature of the processing suggests something more than just a one-off, desperate meal. Some interpretations propose that these acts were a form of nutritional cannibalism, where other hominins were simply another food source, treated no differently than a wild boar or a rabbit. It's a stark, brutal logic if it has calories and you can catch it. You eat it. Your primal self might grudgingly nod in understanding, while your modern self recoils. Imagine the daily life in such a cave. The smoky air from the central fire, the skins draped over rocky ledges for warmth, the constant vigilance against predators. Resources were finite. Every calorie counted. A successful hunt meant survival for days. A failed one could mean starvation. In such a context, the decision to turn to anthropophagy, however horrifying to you, might have been a calculated, albeit grim, choice for the group's survival. It reminds you how truly fragile life was and how resilient the human spirit could be, even in its darkest manifestations. But here's where the obscure detail comes in, adding another layer to this ancient puzzle. At some sites, researchers have found evidence not just of butchery, but of what appears to be differential treatment of human remains compared to animal remains, even when both were processed. For example, while animal bones might be indiscriminately discarded, Certain human bones might show signs of having been broken in a way that suggests a focus on the head or specific long bones, sometimes even with a level of care that goes beyond simple defleshing for food. It's almost as if some parts held a different significance. It's like when you buy a fancy box of chocolates and immediately go for the truffle ones, leaving the plain ones for later. Maybe there was a preference for the good bits. The specific cut marks on the bones provide a wealth of information. Archaeologists can discern the type of tools used: stone flakes, blades, the angle of the cuts, and the sequence of butchery. These marks often mirror those found on large game animals like deer or mammoth, suggesting that humans were processed with the same techniques used for animal carcasses. This points to a functional approach, treating human bodies, at least in part, as another source of food. It's a pragmatic, if unsettling, consistency. This brings us to the thorny concept of ritual. Did these early hominins possess the cognitive capacity for ritual? It's a huge question. While definitive proof is elusive, the repeated patterned nature of bone modification at some sites hints at more than just random acts of consumption. Could it have been an early form of territorial marking? A way to eliminate rival groups and send a terrifying message to any would-be invaders? Imagine stumbling upon a scene like that. You probably wouldn't stick around to ask for directions. Recall the concept of taboo from Chapter 1, which now feels like a very thin veneer over the primal urges of survival. In these cold, ancient caves, the boundaries of that taboo seem to blur, bending under the immense pressure of necessity. It highlights that the concept of cannibalism itself is broad and encompasses vastly different motivations and contexts. It's a reminder that human behavior is incredibly adaptable, and sometimes terrifyingly so, when faced with the ultimate test. The academic debate here is particularly intense. Archaeologists and paleoanthropologists still grapple with the precise interpretation of these ancient human bone modifications, with fierce arguments over whether they definitively point to nutritional cannibalism, intergroup violence with symbolic consumption, or even specific mortuary practices that involved defleshing but not necessarily eating. The evidence is often fragmentary, and distinguishing between a meal and a ritual cleansing in the archaeological record, hundreds of thousands of years later, is like trying to guess the original flavor of a piece of ancient chewing gum. The discovery of human bones with such evidence of processing often sparks public fascination and academic debate. Sites like Gran Dolina at Atapuerca have yielded thousands of fragmented human remains from over 800,000 years ago, showing consistent cut marks and breakage patterns, strongly suggesting dietary cannibalism by Homo antecessor, an early human ancestor. This pushes the timeline for anthropophagy far back into the deep past, suggesting it's not just a quirk of Homo sapiens, but perhaps a more ancient behavior. It's like finding out your very distant ancestors had some truly unconventional dining habits. Think about the world these beings inhabited. Language, if it existed, was rudimentary. Concepts of self, community, and the afterlife were surely vastly different from yours. Yet they faced the same fundamental challenges: finding food, securing shelter, protecting their group. In such a context, every act had a profound impact. If a rival group was consumed, it wasn't just about calories. It was about the total obliteration of a threat, the absorption of their essence, or simply the ultimate expression of dominance. It's the ultimate mic drop, but with a lot more chewing. The interpretation of survival cannibalism is critical. It implies a desperate and often non-ritualistic act, undertaken purely to stave off starvation. However, yet even within such a context, there might have been accompanying rituals or social rules governing who could consume whom, and how the act was framed culturally. It's rarely just about the calories. The complexity of human societies means there's always more than meets the eye. Even in the most primal acts, you might envision them as brutish and mindless, driven purely by instinct. But archaeological finds, like the tools they crafted with incredible skill and the evidence of cooperative hunting, reveal a far more complex picture. These were intelligent beings, capable of planning, communication, and social organization. And with complexity comes the potential for more nuanced behaviors, including those that transcend mere survival. The fact that these practices largely disappear as more abundant food sources became available, or as human societies evolved more complex social structures and food acquisition strategies, further supports the survival hypothesis for many of these early European instances. When the mammoths were plentiful and hunting techniques improved, the need for such grim measures diminished. It's a testament to human ingenuity in adapting to their environment, even if that adaptation sometimes involved uncomfortable choices. Consider the energy needed to hunt and butcher another hominin. It wasn't trivial. It would have required coordination, perhaps even cunning, and certainly a willingness to confront another intelligent being. This wasn't a casual snack. It was a serious undertaking, suggesting a strong underlying motivation, whether that was dire hunger or a potent symbolic meaning. It's like deciding to assemble IKEA furniture. You don't do it unless you're really motivated. As you slowly withdraw from the chilling darkness of these ancient European caves, the cold reality of those desperate times settles upon you. You're left with a profound sense of the tenacity of early humans, their struggle against overwhelming odds, and the stark choices they sometimes had to make to ensure the survival of their group. The broken bones and fragmented skulls whisper stories of hunger, resilience, and a past that is both deeply human and profoundly unsettling, reminding you that sometimes surviving is a victory in itself, no matter the cost. The idea of survival cannibalism is often debated. While it certainly happened in more recent historical famines, proving it for such ancient periods is difficult. The issue is that the archaeological signatures for survival-driven consumption and ritualistic consumption can sometimes overlap. Both might involve similar butchery marks. It's the context, the consistency, and the presence of other behavioral clues that help researchers try to differentiate. You leave the cold, echoing caves of prehistoric Europe, where survival dictated grim choices, and find yourself now in a space that feels surprisingly intimate, almost tender. The chill of desperation fades, replaced by a quiet, profound solemnity. You're entering the realm of endocannibalism, a form of anthropophagy where the deceased members of one's own group, often family or close kin, are consumed. This isn't about power, conquest, or desperate hunger. It's about mourning, memory, and the intricate dance of keeping loved ones forever close, even beyond the veil of death. As you mentally navigate these ancient landscapes, you feel the chill of the distant past. The survival instinct, the relentless drive to persist, was paramount. And perhaps in times of extreme scarcity, the line between us and them when it came to food sources became terrifyingly thin. It's not a pretty thought, but it's a deeply human one, stretching back to the very origins of our lineage. The common historical fact that often comes to mind when considering endocannibalism is the practices observed among certain indigenous groups, particularly in parts of the Amazon basin, such as the Yanomami people of Venezuela and Brazil. While the specific details vary, the underlying motivation was to reintegrate the deceased's spiritual essence into the living community, ensuring their soul found peace and remained connected to their kin. Imagine the gentle murmur of a rainforest, the soft sounds of daily life, and the deep, spiritual connection these communities share with their ancestral lands and each other. The implications of these findings are profound. They force you to confront a past that is far more challenging than you might have imagined. It pushes against your comfortable modern sensibilities, reminding you that the spectrum of human behavior, even in its earliest forms, was incredibly broad and often unsettling. It also highlights the incredible adaptability of our ancestors, who found ways to survive and even thrive in conditions that would cause your sophisticated self to crumble faster than a stale cracker. For the Yanomami, when a member of the community dies, their body is typically cremated. After cremation, the ashes and pulverized bone fragments are collected. These remnants are then traditionally mixed into a plantain soup or a drink, which is consumed by the close relatives of the deceased. You might envision a small, intimate gathering, the air thick with the scent of wood smoke and the quiet grief of a family. The act is not hurried. It is a ritual of profound respect, a final physical act of communion. It's like a family reunion where one member is a very integrated part of the refreshments. You continue to sift through the hypothetical dust of time, piecing together the fragments of a story that is largely untold. The sounds of ancient life, the crunch of bones, the flickering light of fire illuminating faces that are both familiar and alien. they swirl around you. The past isn't just a collection of dates and names, it's a living, breathing, sometimes terrifying place, full of answers and even more questions. What secrets will the next layer of Earth reveal? What other truths about our distant past are waiting to be uncovered? Challenging everything you thought you knew about what it means to be human. This practice is driven by a deep spiritual belief. The Yanomami believe that a person's spirit needs to be guided properly to the afterlife. And if their remains are left to decompose in the ground, their spirit might linger unhappily or be vulnerable. By consuming the ashes, the living literally become the vessel for the deceased spirit, ensuring its peaceful journey and continued presence within the lineage. It's the ultimate form of carrying someone with you, isn't it? You've explored the faint, million-year-old echoes of hominin behavior, a past so distant it feels like a dream. Now, as the prehistoric mist thins slightly, you find yourself in the rugged, ice-kissed landscapes of ancient Europe and Asia, a world where another species, not quite you, but incredibly close, once thrived the Neanderthals. Picture yourself, standing amidst a group of powerful, stocky figures, their brows heavy, their muscles taut, perfectly adapted to the cold, harsh environment. The air is sharper here, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow. You feel the raw power emanating from them, a silent strength honed by relentless survival. The motivations are strikingly different from the consumption of enemies. Here, it is an act of love, remembrance, and duty. It's an expression of the enduring bond between the living and the dead, a way to prevent the complete separation that physical death might otherwise imply. You can almost feel the weight of this responsibility, the solemnity of accepting a part of your beloved ancestor into your own being. These were not the brutish, dim-witted cavemen of popular caricature. Oh no. Manku, the common historical fact, which has steadily gained ground in recent decades, is that Neanderthals were highly intelligent and sophisticated hominins. They were skilled hunters, capable of bringing down massive prey like mammoths and woolly rhinos. They crafted complex tools, used fire, buried their dead, and perhaps even adorned themselves with feathers and shells. You stand there, observing them, and realize they are far more like you than you might have ever imagined. Yet their world and some of their practices remain profoundly alien. But here's an obscure detail that highlights the unique nature of this practice among some groups, particularly in the past. The skull or other significant bones of a revered ancestor might be carefully cleaned, sometimes decorated, and kept within the family dwelling, serving as a focal point for veneration before eventual ceremonial consumption of a small portion. This wasn't necessarily about consuming large amounts, but rather symbolic ingestion of a potent spiritual relic. It's like having a treasured family heirloom, but one that you eventually, well, internalize. It certainly adds a new dimension to family keepsakes, doesn't it? It's in their bone puzzles that our story takes a particularly unsettling turn. At several Neanderthal sites, archaeologists have unearthed compelling, if disturbing, evidence. Sites like Goyet Cave in Belgium or El Sidrón Cave in Spain provide chilling insights. You crouch down, examining bone fragments excavated from these ancient shelters. What you see on Neanderthal bones, both adult and juvenile, are clear. Unequivocal signs of butchery, cut marks from stone tools consistent with defleshing, percussion marks from hammers used to break bones for marrow extraction, and even burning marks, suggesting roasting. These marks are often indistinguishable from those found on the bones of the animals they hunted and ate. It's like seeing the same signature on two different documents, and one of them is an invoice for, well, you know. This further underscores the idea that the object of consumption holds a concentrated spiritual power or essence, and that the act is a means of absorbing that specific quality. It's a highly localized, deeply personal practice, often performed by those with the closest familial ties to the deceased. Why would they do this? The leading hypothesis, fiercely debated but supported by significant evidence, suggests that Neanderthals practiced cannibalism, possibly for nutritional reasons, especially during periods of extreme scarcity. Imagine the brutal efficiency of it. Every calorie counted, and in a world where food sources could vanish overnight due to changing seasons, shifting migrations, or intense competition, overlooking any potential meal was simply not an option. It's a grim calculus, but one that might have been necessary for survival in such unforgiving times. You can almost hear their primal stomachs rumbling, a sound that transcends millennia. The academic debate surrounding endocannibalism often revolves around the precise spiritual beliefs and societal functions that underpin these practices, and how they relate to concepts of identity, kinship, and the afterlife across diverse cultures. Were these acts primarily about grief and memory, or also about inheriting specific traits, knowledge, or status from the deceased? And how did early anthropological accounts, sometimes colored by Western biases, accurately represent these complex spiritual systems? It's a fascinating puzzle, trying to understand the deepest human connections through the lens of history. But here's the obscure detail that adds a layer of eerie specificity to these findings. At some Neanderthal sites, particularly those showing evidence of consumption, archaeologists have noted an almost systematic fracturing pattern of the cranial bones, specifically aimed at accessing the brain. While marrow from long bones is calorically rich, the brain is an incredibly dense source of fat and nutrients. The precision with which these skulls were opened suggests not just a casual breakage, but a deliberate effort to extract this prized organ. It's not just a quick smash, it's a careful, almost surgical approach to brain harvesting. It's like finding a perfectly opened pistachio shell and knowing someone was really committed to getting that nut out. You consider the profound difference in perspective. In many modern societies, the idea of consuming human remains, even of a loved one, is deeply taboo. But for communities like the Yanomami, it is the most profound act of respect and connection. It challenges your preconceived notions of how one grieves, remembers, and maintains a relationship with those who have passed on. It's a reminder that cultural diversity extends to the very core of human experience, even death. This focus on the brain, coupled with the processing of other bones for marrow and meat, points strongly towards a nutritional imperative. However, the academic debate here revolves around whether this was exclusively nutritional cannibalism, or if some instances also held ritualistic or symbolic meaning. While the evidence for pure survival is compelling, the idea that a species capable of burying its dead might also have imbued these acts with some deeper significance cannot be entirely dismissed. Were they eating their enemies to absorb their strength, their deceased kin to keep their essence within the group, or simply because a brain is a surprisingly tasty, high-fat snack in an Ice Age diet? The truth is, without a Neanderthal to sit down with over a cup of tea or perhaps a bone broth, we can only infer, imagine the emotional landscape of such a ritual. There would be sorrow, of course, but also a sense of peace, a feeling of continuity. The ancestor isn't truly gone. Their essence is now part of the living, flowing through the veins of their descendants. This provides a deep sense of comfort and reassurance. Knitting together the fabric of family and community across generations, you stand among the silent stones, trying to imagine the scene. A successful hunt, but not of a deer. The methodical cracking of bones. The flickering firelight on stoic faces. What did they feel? Revulsion, necessity? A strange mix of both. Their emotional landscape would have been vastly different from yours, shaped by the constant struggle and the stark realities of their existence. You might recoil, but they simply saw another source of sustenance, perhaps even a hard-won victory. Recall the concept of taboo from Chapter 1. Here, you see the ultimate inversion of a common Western taboo. What is reviled in one culture is revered in another. This stark contrast emphasizes that taboos are not universal, but are deeply embedded in specific cultural, religious, and historical contexts. It highlights the incredible plasticity of human beliefs and practices. Consider the energy output. Hunting a large animal was a cooperative effort, fraught with danger, so was processing it. But doing the same to another hominin, perhaps a rival, would have carried its own risks and complexities. It implies a degree of organization and a lack of squeamishness that is, to say the least, unnerving. It suggests a pragmatic approach to resources that saw little distinction between a deer and, well, a neighbor from the wrong side of the valley. The origin of these endocannibalistic practices is often rooted in the specific ecological and historical conditions of the communities. In dense rainforest environments, traditional burial practices can be challenging due to rapid decomposition and the presence of scavengers. Cremation, followed by endocannibalism, offered a pragmatic solution to body disposal while simultaneously fulfilling profound spiritual and social needs. It's a very efficient way to handle the afterlife. When you think about it, the discovery of these sites challenges your modern notions of morality and what it means to be human. It forces you to confront the uncomfortable truth that cannibalism is not just a dark chapter in distant human history, but potentially an ancient, deeply rooted behavior even among your closest evolutionary cousins. It's a chilling reminder of the lengths to which survival can drive any species, including your own. It's like finding out your favorite sweet, fluffy animal mascot actually has a hidden sharp tooth. These practices also serve to reinforce social cohesion. By partaking in the ritual, individuals confirm their membership in the group and their commitment to the shared spiritual framework. It creates an undeniable physical link between all members, living and dead, strengthening the collective identity. You feel the palpable sense of community, a bond forged not just by shared life, but by shared death. Recall the concept of differential treatment we touched on in Chapter 2, the idea that some human bones might have been treated with particular care even during butchery. For Neanderthals, while many sites point to straightforward defleshing and marrow extraction, some researchers have noted subtle variations that could hint at funerary practices intertwined with consumption, or even symbolic gestures. For instance, at some sites, certain skull fragments might be missing or appear to have been handled differently, leading to hypotheses about skull cults or the ritualistic preservation of specific parts. It's a complex tapestry, and every thread tells a different, often ambiguous story. While the Yanomami are a prominent example, historical records and ethnographic accounts point to similar endo-cannibalistic practices in other parts of the world, including some indigenous groups in Australia, Papua New Guinea, and even historical accounts from parts of Eurasia, though often with differing rituals and specific motivations. This widespread, though fragmented, occurrence suggests a recurring human impulse to maintain a spiritual connection with the deceased through physical means. The environment Neanderthals inhabited was harsh, characterized by glacial cycles and periods of fluctuating resources. In such a world, adaptability was key. Their robust bodies and large brains suggest a capacity for complex problem-solving, and part of that problem-solving might have included utilizing every available protein source, even those that today seem horrific. It's a testament to their resilience, however unsettling the implications. They were the ultimate survivalists, and sometimes survival means going to extremes. The health implications of such practices, particularly regarding the transmission of diseases like Kuru-Aprion disease, linked to the consumption of brain tissue among the 4 people of Papua New Guinea, have been extensively studied. While not all forms of endocannibalism involve the consumption of nervous tissue, the risk of disease transmission is a stark reminder of the biological consequences that can arise from deeply ingrained cultural practices. It's a grim footnote, isn't it? Think about the implications for disease. Consuming another hominin, especially the brain, carries risks, such as prion diseases like Kuru, famously found in the 4 people of Papua New Guinea. While there's no direct archaeological evidence of Neanderthals suffering from such diseases, it's a silent risk that underscores the biological consequences of such practices. It's a grim footnote to an already grim story, reminding you that nature often finds a way to balance the books, even if it's with something unpleasant. Despite the potential risks, the spiritual imperative often outweighed any perceived danger. For many of these communities, the well-being of the soul and the maintenance of ancestral ties were paramount, dwarfing concerns that would dominate a modern medical perspective. It's a powerful illustration of how different value systems shape human behavior. The archaeological debate over the extent and nature of Neanderthal cannibalism continues to evolve. New techniques in bone analysis. Ancient DNA studies, though, direct DNA of consumed individuals is rare, and a deeper understanding of taphonomy, the processes that affect remains, after death constantly refine our interpretations. Every new fragment, every new mark, is scrutinized, leading to fresh arguments and revised hypotheses. It's a historical detective story with very few living witnesses and a lot of very old, broken evidence. As you step away from these intimate, solemn rituals, the rainforest canopy seems to hum with ancient spirits. you're left with a profound appreciation for the diverse ways humanity navigates grief and mortality. Endo-cannibalism, far from being a barbaric act, emerges as a deeply meaningful, albeit confronting, expression of kinship, a physical manifestation of a spiritual truth that those you love are never truly gone, but live on, perhaps even within you, forever part of your story. It's a quiet, comforting thought in its own peculiar way. As you conclude your quiet observation of these ancient hunters, the image of their powerful forms fades into the prehistoric gloom. You are left with the lingering questions about their practices, their intelligence, and the fine line between survival and taboo. Their bone puzzles continue to challenge, to provoke, and to remind you that the human story, in all its iterations, is far more complex and often more brutal than you might wish it to be. The echoes of their survival and their choices reverberate through time, shaping your understanding of your own deep origins. You've traversed chilling ice caves, humid rainforests, and sun-drenched islands, witnessing the raw realities of anthropophagy from desperate survival to profound kinship. Now, as the ambient sounds of those distant lands fade, you find yourself floating in a more abstract space, one where the physical act of consumption gives way to the intricate web of human belief and meaning. This is where we delve into the heart of it, all the symbolic consumption that often underlies these practices, transforming a grim act into a potent message, a spiritual transfer, or a societal affirmation. Having navigated the chilling, pragmatic world of the Neanderthals, you now cross the vast expanse of time and ocean, landing amidst the vibrant, complex civilizations of ancient Mesoamerica. Imagine yourself stepping into a bustling pre-Columbian city, perhaps Tenochtitlan, the awe-inspiring capital of the Aztec Empire, or a grand Mayan ceremonial center shrouded in humid jungle air. The scent of copal incense hangs heavy, mixed with the rich aroma of maize and the faint, metallic tang of something else, something less pleasant. You see towering pyramids piercing the sky, adorned with intricate carvings, and hear the rhythmic beat of drums, the chanting of priests, and the murmurs of a vast, devout populace. This is a world where religion, warfare, and daily life are inextricably intertwined, and the sun itself demands a terrifying tribute. The common historical fact that helps us understand this broader concept is that many instances of cannibalism, both historically and ethnographically documented, were primarily ritualistic and symbolic, rather than purely nutritional, or even solely driven by hatred of an enemy. It's less about a meal and more about a message. You might imagine a complex ceremony unfolding. Every gesture, every utterance, every bite laden with layers of cultural significance that extend far beyond simple sustenance. It's like how you might eat a piece of cake at a birthday party. It's not just about the sugar, it's about celebrating a life, right? The common historical fact, often sensationalized but rooted in undeniable archaeological and ethno-historical evidence, is that human sacrifice was a widespread and deeply ingrained practice across various Mesoamerican cultures, most notably the Aztec, Maya, and Zapotec civilizations. These were not random acts of barbarity, but meticulously planned, ritually significant events, designed to appease powerful gods, ensure cosmic balance, or commemorate important victories. You watch, perhaps from the sidelines, as a procession moves, colorful and solemn, toward a temple pyramid, your breath catching in your throat as the true purpose of the ceremony becomes chillingly clear. Consider for a moment the wide spectrum of reasons we've touched upon absorbing mana or spiritual essence from a powerful foe, reuniting with the spirit of a deceased loved one, or even asserting ultimate dominance. In each case, the act of consumption was a vehicle for something else entirely. It was a language spoken not with words, but with flesh and bone, conveying profound truths about cosmology, social hierarchy, and the very nature of existence. You can almost feel the weight of these unspoken meanings, heavy in the air. Within this framework of sacrifice, the unsettling truth emerges ritualistic anthropophagy. The consumption of human flesh often followed these sacrificial events. This wasn't cannibalism born of famine, but a deliberate, religiously sanctioned act. For the Aztecs, specifically, once a captive warrior was sacrificed, his body was often taken down, dismembered, and distributed among the elite, warrior classes, or priests. The act was believed to transfer the deceased's strength, courage, or spiritual essence to the consumer. It was the ultimate communion, a way to become one with the sacred power of the sacrificed. Imagine attending a feast where the main course has a particularly, shall we say, personal flavor profile. It really puts a new spin on eat your greens, doesn't it? This concept of symbolic consumption is crucial because it helps move beyond a simplistic, often judgmental view of these ancient practices. It challenges the idea that they were merely acts of savagery committed by primitive peoples. Instead, it invites you to see them as complex cultural expressions, as logical within their own belief system's responses to specific social, spiritual, or environmental needs. It's a reminder that even the most uncomfortable human behaviors can be deeply rational from an insider's perspective. The motivations here were profoundly spiritual and political. For the Aztecs, their cosmology dictated that the sun god Huitzilopochtli required a constant supply of human hearts and blood to continue his daily journey across the sky and prevent the end of the world. Captive warriors, particularly brave ones, were considered the most valuable offerings. By consuming parts of the sacrificed, participants were not only honoring the gods, but also symbolically participating in the cosmic drama, absorbing the virtues of the fallen, and reinforcing the social and religious hierarchy. It was a potent display of power, both divine and earthly, but here's an obscure detail that truly underscores the depth of this symbolism in some cultures. There were accounts of mock or effigy cannibalism, where symbolic representations of human flesh, specific animals, plants, or even dough molded into human shapes, were consumed in rituals that paralleled actual anthropophagy, but without the physical act itself. These rituals served to reinforce the same social or spiritual meanings without the gruesome reality. It's like having a vegan version of a traditional meat dish. It still carries the cultural weight without the actual animal product. A much less messy way to absorb your enemy's mana, if you ask me. But here's the obscure detail that often goes unmentioned in general discussions, while the hearts and blood were typically offered to the deities. In other parts distributed, there is ethnographic and archaeological evidence suggesting that the long bones of sacrificed individuals were sometimes meticulously defleshed and then carved or transformed into musical instruments, tools, or ritual objects. These trophy bones might be flutes known as tlapanhuehuetl, or similar instruments, spatulas, or even effigies, indicating that the body was not merely a source of sustenance, but also a raw material for powerful symbolic artifacts. It's like turning your old basketball into a fancy lamp, a repurposing one but with much higher stakes. These mock rituals are incredibly telling. They demonstrate that the meaning was paramount. If the intention and belief could be transferred through a symbolic substitute, it shows that the physical act was often a means to an end, not an end in itself. It highlights the power of metaphor and ritual in human societies, where symbols can be as potent as the literal. It's like how a wedding ring isn't just a piece of metal, it's a tangible symbol of a deep commitment. This practice elevates the act beyond simple consumption, demonstrating a profound reverence and a desire to integrate the essence of the sacrificed into the material culture and ongoing ritual life of the community. It means that even after the flesh was consumed, the skeletal remains continued to serve a vital purpose, carrying the memory and power of the individual. The academic debate surrounding symbolic consumption largely centers on the precise motivations and interpretations of these acts, and whether they can ever be fully disentangled from issues of power, survival, or even psychological trauma. Can an act be purely symbolic if it involves real human lives? And how much does our modern understanding of psychology and ethics bias our interpretation of ancient symbolic systems? It's a truly thorny thicket of questions that keeps anthropologists up at night. The academic debate surrounding Mesoamerican anthropophagy is multifaceted. Historians and archaeologists fiercely debate the true extent and primary motivation of the practice, whether it was primarily for ritual, nutrition, or a combination of both, and how widespread it truly was among the general populace. Some scholars argue that while symbolic consumption occurred, The idea of widespread, large-scale nutritional cannibalism has been exaggerated by early Spanish chroniclers, who might have had an agenda to demonize indigenous practices. Others point to archaeological evidence, such as cut marks and bone distribution patterns in refuse heaps, as strong indicators of systematic defleshing and consumption. It's like a historical food critic trying to determine if a dish was truly enjoyed, or just tolerated for the sake of presentation. You might think about how symbols work in your own life. A national flag isn't just fabric, it represents a nation, its history, its ideals. A religious sacrament, like communion, involves the consumption of bread and wine, which are symbolic of something far greater than their physical form. These parallels, while not equating modern practices to ancient cannibalism, help you understand the mechanism of symbolic meaning, where a physical act transcends its literal boundaries. You stand there, observing the intricate rituals, the solemn faces, the palpable tension in the air. The concept of death in Mesoamerican cultures was radically different from your modern Western perspective. Death was not an end, but a transition, a vital part of the cosmic cycle. Sacrifice, therefore, was not merely taking a life, but an essential act of creation and renewal, feeding the gods to ensure the continued existence of the world. In this worldview, consuming a part of the sacrifice could be seen as an ultimate act of spiritual participation. Consider the role of fear and respect. When an enemy's heart was consumed, it was often with a mixture of both: fear of their power, but also respect for their bravery and the strength they possessed. The consumption was a way to neutralize that fear and absorb that respect, turning a threat into an asset. It's a very practical form of psychological warfare, even if it's wrapped in ritual. Consider the practicalities. The scale of sacrifices, particularly during peak periods of Aztec power, was immense. Some accounts speak of thousands of victims over a few days. Managing and processing such a large number of bodies would have required significant organization and infrastructure. This wasn't a casual backyard barbecue. It was an industrial-scale operation, highlighting the central role it played in their society. Recall the concept of taboo from Chapter 1. Symbolic consumption often pushes against the very boundaries of that taboo, sometimes reinforcing it through a forbidden act, other times recontextualizing it entirely. The power of the taboo itself lends even more weight to the symbolic act. By engaging in something deeply transgressive, the meaning becomes even more potent, more impactful. It's like whispering a secret. The very act of its secrecy makes it more meaningful. The psychological impact on the participants is fascinating. Were they driven by terror, devotion, or a profound sense of duty? For warriors who captured enemies for sacrifice, it was the highest honor, a path to prestige and spiritual fulfillment. For those who consumed, it was a direct connection to the divine and to the very essence of their worldview. It's a mind-boggling leap from your world of Netflix and delivery pizza to a reality where human flesh is a sacred meal. The idea of the body as a vessel for the soul or spirit is a recurring theme across many cultures. When human remains were consumed, symbolically or literally, it was often because the consumer believed they were accessing this non-physical essence. The body was seen not as mere flesh, but as a temporary container for something eternal. This belief system is fundamental to understanding why such acts were considered sacred or meaningful. Recall the idea of taboo from Chapter 1. Here, you see a culture where what you consider the ultimate taboo is deeply sacred. This stark contrast underscores how culturally constructed these moral boundaries truly are. What is revulsion to one is reverence to another. It challenges your fundamental assumptions about human nature and the universality of moral codes. It's a humbling reminder that your own cultural lens is just one of many. Think about how many cultures have elaborate funeral rites. These are symbolic acts, designed to ease the passage of the deceased, comfort the living, and affirm community bonds. Endo-cannibalism, in its most loving forms, can be seen as an extreme extension of such a funeral rite, a final, intimate farewell and reintegration. It's just a bit more involved than a eulogy in a casserole. Archaeological evidence supporting these practices includes not only the cut marks and breakage patterns on human bones, but also the context in which they are found. Bones might be intermingled with sacrificial implements, temple offerings, or within ritual deposits. Iconography, such as codices and sculptures, also depict scenes that strongly imply anthropophagy in a ritual context, often showing figures holding or consuming parts of sacrificed individuals. It's like finding a recipe book with some really unusual ingredients listed. Anthropologists often stress the importance of understanding these practices within their own cultural context, rather than imposing external judgments. To call them simply savage or primitive misses the profound and intricate layers of meaning that underpin them. It's like trying to understand a complex poem by only counting the words. The true meaning lies deeper. The precise role of nutritional need versus ritualistic obligation remains a key point of contention. While Mesoamerican populations were highly agrarian, their diet could sometimes be lacking in animal protein, particularly in large urban centers. Some scholars argue that the consumption of sacrificed individuals, particularly prisoners of war, could have provided a significant, albeit occasional, source of animal protein, thus serving a dual purpose. It's the ultimate waste not, want not philosophy. Applied to the most extreme circumstances, even the acts that appear to be purely for survival, like those in prehistoric Europe, could have been imbued with symbolic meaning. Perhaps the act of sharing the flesh of a deceased comrade, even in desperation, became a grim communion, a final act of solidarity in the face of overwhelming odds. The line between practicality and ritual can be incredibly thin, especially when life itself hangs in the balance. The ending of these practices, largely with the Spanish conquest, reveals how deeply they were entwined with the indigenous religious and political systems. The Spanish, horrified by what they witnessed, systematically suppressed these rituals, often replacing them with their own forms of religious ceremony. This marked a profound cultural rupture, erasing practices that had been central to Mesoamerican societies for centuries, if not millennia. The lasting impact of these symbolic acts ripples through history. While overt anthropophagy has largely disappeared, echoes of symbolic consumption persist in many cultures, whether in religious ceremonies, in the metaphorical language of consuming knowledge or power, or in the very idea of inheritance, where the traits and legacy of ancestors are taken in by descendants. As you step back from the vibrant yet unnerving world of Mesoamerican sacred feasts, you are left with a profound understanding of how belief systems can shape human behavior in ways that transcend mere survival. The intricate rituals, the spiritual justifications, and the sheer scale of these practices speak to a worldview utterly alien to your own, yet undeniably human in its complexity and devotion. The echoes of those sacred drums, and the unspoken truths they represented continue to resonate through the archaeological record, forever challenging your perception of the past. As you drift away from this realm of complex symbolism, the ancient practices no longer seem quite so alien. You begin to grasp that human beings, across all times and cultures, have sought to make sense of life, death, and existence through powerful, often challenging rituals. Symbolic consumption, in all its varied forms, stands as a testament to humanity's profound need for meaning, and our astonishing capacity to imbue even the most fundamental acts with spiritual and social significance. It's a lot to chew on, isn't it? As the echoes of Mesoamerican drums fade into the thin air, you ascend, you feel the altitude, the chill biting at your skin, as you journey into the majestic, cloud-piercing peaks of the Andes. Imagine yourself standing on a high mountain plateau, the air crisp and clean, the vast, ancient landscape stretching out before you. Llamas graze peacefully in the distance, and the distant sound of a pan flute drifts on the wind. This is the heartland of the Inca Empire and its predecessors, a civilization born from the harsh beauty of the mountains, where life and death were intimately woven into the very fabric of the cosmos. Here, the sacred wasn't consumed in a flurry of blood and ritual, but preserved, revered, and in a deeply personal way, kept alive. You drift gently now. The echoes of chilling ice caves, vibrant ceremonial feasts, and solemn rainforest rituals slowly fading into a distant hum. The vivid images of broken bones, spiritual reintegration, and the absorption of powerful essences begin to blur, softening at the edges like old photographs. You've journeyed through the deeply uncomfortable, yet undeniably human, history of anthropophagy, exploring its myriad forms and surprising motivations. Now, in this quiet space, It's time to sift through what you've seen and consider what these ancient practices truly reveal about humanity's enduring past. And perhaps even your own present. The common historical fact that sets the stage here is the Inca Empire's sophisticated system of ancestor veneration, where the deceased rulers, or malqui, were treated as living entities, consulted, paraded, and even fed offerings. This wasn't just a quaint custom, it was a central pillar of Inca political and religious life. You see attendants carefully tending to the mummified remains of a long-dead emperor, dressing them in fine textiles, offering them food and drink, and carrying them on litters through the capital city of Cusco. It's like a particularly well-preserved, highly revered, and slightly dusty VIP who still pulls all the strings. The common historical fact that crystallizes from this journey is that cannibalism, while undeniably disturbing to modern sensibilities, was a multifaceted phenomenon woven into the fabric of many ancient societies for reasons far more complex than simple barbarity. It wasn't a monolithic act, it was a spectrum, ranging from desperate survival in the face of starvation to deeply meaningful ritual acts steeped in spiritual belief, social hierarchy, and the desire for continuity. You understand now that judging these actions solely through your 21st century lens would be a profound disservice to the nuances of human history. It's like trying to understand a Shakespeare play by only reading the stage directions. Within this profound respect for the ancestors, an intriguing and somewhat unsettling practice existed, particularly among the elite and in specific ceremonial contexts, a form of endo-cannibalism, not for nutrition, but for spiritual connection and the perpetual integration of the deceased into the living community. While not widespread or as overt as the Mesoamerican practices, historical accounts and archaeological findings suggest instances where, as part of funerary rites, small portions of the deceased, particularly the brain or other internal organs, might have been consumed by close relatives or priests. This was believed to ensure the continued presence of the ancestor's spirit within the family line, solidifying lineage and absorbing their wisdom or essence. It's the ultimate form of keeping someone close to your heart. If that heart happens to be connected to your stomach, you recall the gnawing hunger that drove people in prehistoric Europe to crack open bones for marrow, a pragmatic, albeit grim, act of survival against a brutal environment. You remember the fierce warriors of Mesoamerica and the Pacific, consuming the hearts or flesh of their enemies, not just for sustenance, but to absorb their power, courage, or mana, transforming the vanquished into a source of strength for the living. And then there were the deeply loving acts of endo-cannibalism in the Amazon, where ashes of beloved kin were consumed to keep their spirits intertwined with the family, defying the finality of death. Each context offers a radically different perspective on the same fundamental act. It's almost like a choose-your-own-adventure story, but with significantly higher stakes. The Andean worldview emphasized duality and reciprocity, the idea that everything existed in balance and that the living owed a profound debt to the dead, who in turn influenced the present. The mountains themselves were considered sacred ancestors. In this cosmology, the body, even after death, was seen as a vessel for the spirit and its careful preservation, whether through mummification often naturally occurring due to the dry, cold climate, and then enhanced by human practices or by other means, was paramount. This journey forces you to confront the elasticity of human morality and the incredible adaptability of cultural norms. What is considered an absolute taboo in your world was, for others, a sacred duty, a necessary survival tactic, or a profound expression of grief. It highlights that your understanding of human nature is largely shaped by the specific cultural and historical framework you inhabit. It's a humbling thought, isn't it, that the very lines you draw between right and wrong might be etched in sand rather than carved in stone. But here's the obscure detail that often gets overlooked beyond the grand mummified emperors. Many common people practiced a more intimate form of ancestor preservation, sometimes involving defleshing and bundling their deceased relatives into a fetal position, wrapped in textiles, creating mummy bundles. These bundles were then kept in homes, brought out for festivals, and interacted with, sometimes for generations. This wasn't just about display, it was about maintaining an active relationship. And it's within the context of some of these more personal, localized practices that the whispers of subtle, symbolic consumption sometimes arise. Perhaps of dried tissues or even the small, pulverized bones mixed into a drink. It's like your grandmother's ashes on the mantelpiece, but with the possibility of them ending up in your morning smoothie. But here's an obscure detail that truly brings this historical elasticity home in various historical accounts. There are subtle references or archaeological hints of a practice sometimes termed therapeutic cannibalism, where parts of human remains, often mummified or powdered bones, were ingested not for ritualistic or nutritional purposes, but as supposed cures for ailments, based on the belief that the vital essence or properties of the deceased could transfer healing benefits to the living. This practice persisted in some forms even into early modern Europe, often in apothecaries selling ground mummies. Imagine going to the pharmacy for a headache, and they offer you a spoonful of, talk about side effects. This practice emphasizes the concept of kinship beyond death, where the boundaries between the living and the dead were incredibly porous. The deceased were not gone, but merely transformed, still active participants in the social and spiritual life of the community. Endocannibalism, if practiced, would have been the ultimate expression of this bond, a physical embodiment of eternal familial connection. This detail underscores how desperate humanity has been throughout history to find cures and how pervasive the belief in the inherent power of the human body, even after death, truly was. It wasn't about power or kinship, but about health and survival from disease, blurring the lines between medicine, magic, and the macabre. It really makes you appreciate modern medicine, doesn't it? No more wondering if your headache cure is secretly someone's great-great-great-great-grandparent? The academic debate here is particularly nuanced. Archaeologists and ethnohistorians still carefully dissect the scant evidence, debating the precise nature, frequency, and symbolic meaning of these Andean practices, and whether they truly constituted anthropophagy in all instances, or if some accounts were misinterpretations by Spanish chroniclers. The evidence is often more inferential than direct, relying on a combination of colonial-era accounts which can be biased, subtle marks on bones, and the broader cultural context of ancestor veneration. It's like trying to understand a complex family dynamic based only on a few cryptic entries in an old diary. The academic debate that continues to ripple through these ancient stories centers on the precise methodologies for distinguishing between true anthropophagy, symbolic consumption, and post-mortem defleshing in the archaeological record, and how deeply these historical accounts were influenced by colonial biases and sensationalism. How much of what we think we know is based on solid scientific evidence, and how much is a reflection of past prejudices or misunderstandings. It's a bit like trying to solve a cold case where the witnesses are long gone, and the evidence has been buried for millennia. You can feel the reverence for the ancestors permeating the very air. For the Incas and their predecessors, the body was a sacred vessel, and death was a powerful, transformative event. Mummification techniques, varying from elaborate treatments for emperors to simpler, natural preservation in dry caves for commoners, underscore this belief. The goal was to maintain the integrity of the deceased, ensuring their continued participation in the community's well-being. You might ponder the inherent biases that you, as a modern individual, bring to this topic. The sensationalized tales of savages often served to justify conquest and colonization. By carefully examining the archaeological evidence and ethnographic accounts through a more critical lens, you begin to dismantle these old narratives and appreciate the complexity and rationality within their own contexts of these ancient cultures. It's a continuous process of re-education, isn't it? Unlearning the easy, comforting lies for the more challenging, but ultimately more truthful, realities. Consider the role of coca leaves in Andean culture. Widely chewed for millennia, coca was and is a sacred plant used in rituals, offerings, and for its mild stimulant properties, which helped with the rigors of high-altitude living. Imagine a ceremonial gathering where coca is shared, and perhaps subtly. Something else, something deeply ancestral, is also part of the communion. It adds another layer to the sensory experience, doesn't it? Recall the concept of taboo from Chapter 1. Your journey has shown you that taboos are not static. They shift, evolve, and are constructed by societies to define their boundaries. The taboo against cannibalism is a powerful one in your culture, and for good reason. It helps define what it means to be human, to respect the dead, and to maintain social order. But by observing where and why that taboo was sometimes broken or even inverted, you gain a deeper understanding of its purpose and its immense cultural weight. Recall the concept of taboo from Chapter 1. Here, you see a society that reveres the dead, yet might, in specific contexts, consume parts of them. This paradox highlights how different cultures draw their lines of acceptability based on their unique cosmologies and spiritual frameworks. What seems anathema to you is a profound act of love and respect for them. It's a powerful reminder that normal is entirely relative. The enduring fascination with cannibalism, even in your own popular culture, speaks volumes. It taps into primal fears and fascinations, exploring the ultimate transgression. But having journeyed through the true history, you now see beyond the simple horror to the underlying human motivation survival, spiritual connection, power dynamics, and sometimes desperate measures for health. It adds a layer of understanding that goes beyond cheap thrills. The Spanish conquest, with its imposition of Christianity, brutally suppressed many of these indigenous funerary and ancestor veneration practices. The Spanish saw the worship of Malquis and the reverence for mummy bundles as idolatry and desecrated many sacred sites, destroying mummies and forcing conversions. This act of cultural destruction aimed to sever the spiritual ties between the Andean people and their ancestors, undermining their social structure and religious beliefs. Think about the concept of human resilience. Across millennia, facing ice ages, fierce predators, and the constant threat of starvation, humans persisted. The willingness, however grim, to turn to anthropophagy in certain circumstances speaks to an unparalleled drive to survive, to pass on genes, to ensure the continuity of the group. It's a testament to the sheer tenacity of our ancestors, who faced a world far more dangerous and unforgiving than anything you can imagine. Archaeological finds, such as those from the frozen mountaintop ceremonial sites, Capacocha rituals, sometimes involve the remains of sacrificed children who were mummified. While these were offerings to the gods, separate from ancestor veneration, they further illustrate the Andean emphasis on preservation and the belief in a continued relationship with the sacred after death. The condition of these remains often offers clues about internal organ removal or special preparation, which might have paved the way for symbolic consumption in other contexts. As the final wisps of these ancient stories dissipate, you're left with a profound sense of interconnectedness with the past. The human journey has been long, winding, and often dark, but within that darkness, you find not just horror, but also ingenuity, deep spiritual belief, and an endless capacity for cultural adaptation. The echoes of these practices, while faint, serve as a potent reminder of the vast, intricate tapestry of human experience. You've peered into the depths of human behavior and emerged with a more nuanced, if slightly unsettling, understanding of where you come from. The environmental context of the Andes played a significant role. The extremely cold and dry conditions in many high-altitude areas naturally preserved bodies, creating ice mummies like the famous Juanita or Ice Maiden. This natural preservation would have reinforced the belief that the body remained intact, a potent vessel for the spirit, influencing the development of elaborate mummification techniques and the emphasis on the physical presence of ancestors. It's like nature providing a ready-made deep freeze for your revered relatives. Now, as the last stories fade and your journey through the deepest, most unsettling corners of history draws to a close, you might find yourself feeling a little more at peace. The distant past, with all its challenging truths, has been explored, understood, and gently tucked away. The images recede, the voices soften, and the echoes that lingered begin to quiet, allowing your mind to slowly, peacefully unwind. You contemplate the quiet intimacy of these practices compared to the grand, public spectacles of Mesoamerica. Here, the consumption, if it occurred, was likely small-scale, deeply personal, and infused with profound meaning. Rather than a mass event, it speaks to a different kind of relationship with the deceased, one focused on continuity and internalizing their power within the living lineage. You've done well to listen to these tales, to engage with their complexities, and to let the ancient world speak its truths. The air around you feels calm, the sounds of your own home familiar and comforting. Let the quiet stillness envelop you, a soft blanket of tranquility settling over your thoughts. There's nothing left to fear from these old stories now. They're simply whispers on the wind, part of the vast, unending narrative of humanity. So close your eyes, take a deep, slow breath, and let sleep gently claim you. As you slowly descend from the thin air of the Andean peaks, the images of revered mummies and intimate family rituals linger in your mind. You're left with a sense of the deep human need for connection, for meaning in death, and for bridging the gap between generations. The Andean approach, though unsettling to modern sensibilities, was a powerful way to keep the past alive, to draw strength and wisdom from those who came before, and to remind you that even in the most extreme forms, connection can be found in the most unexpected places. It's a quiet, profound lesson from the high mountains,